They called her the beggar widow, the woman who crawled through the darkness to a killer's door because she had nowhere left to go. Ayla Mercer lost everything on the brutal trail west, her husband, her savings, her hope, and arrived in Hollow Creek with a starving child and one night's worth of coin. The town wanted her gone. The shopkeepers turned her away. The saloon mocked her desperation, but when she heard about Rhett Callahan, the grief-stricken rancher who hadn't smiled since burying his wife, she made a choice that would either save her son's life or destroy them both. She walked 5 miles through dust and fear to beg the most dangerous man in the territory for mercy. What happened next shattered everything the frontier thought it knew about weakness and strength. If you want to know whether a broken widow and a man trapped in his own grief can survive the cruelty of the West, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust never stopped. That was the first thing Ayla Mercer learned about Hollow Creek. It coated her teeth, clung to her eyelashes, and turned her black mourning dress the color of dried blood. She stood outside the mercantile with her hand gripping Evan's shoulder, trying to stop herself from shaking while the man behind the counter looked at her like she was something stuck to his boot. "I said no credit," he repeated, louder this time, like she was deaf instead of desperate. "I'm not asking for charity." Ayla's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm asking for 3 days. I'll have work by then." The mercantile owner, a thick man with sweat stains spreading under his arms, laughed once, sharp and mean. "Work? Lady, you just got off a wagon train that buried half its people. You got no husband, no references, and no skills anybody in this town needs. What exactly are you planning to do? Sew fancy dresses for ranch hands?" A woman browsing near the flour sacks snickered. Ayla felt Evan press closer against her leg. He hadn't spoken since they'd arrived in town 2 hours ago, and that silence was worse than any tantrum. "I can cook, clean. So can every other woman within 50 miles, and they got husbands to vouch for them." He leaned over the counter, and Ayla smelled tobacco and something sour. "You want my advice? Get back on a wagon heading east before winter comes. This town ain't got space for another widow with a hungry kid." Ayla opened her mouth, but nothing came. No argument, no plea. Just the hollow realization that he was right about one thing. Evan was hungry. Had been for 2 days. The last of their dried meat had gone to him yesterday, and she'd told him she wasn't hungry, which was true in the way that drowning people aren't thirsty. She turned without another word and walked out. The door slammed behind her, and she heard laughter from inside. Evan looked up at her. His face was thinner than it had been a month ago, before the fever swept through the wagon train and took his father. "Mama?" "We're fine," Ayla lied. She crouched down and brushed the dust from his hair, which did nothing except move it around. "We'll figure it out." But she didn't know how. They'd spent their last $2 on a single night at the boarding house, and the woman who ran it had made it clear there wouldn't be a second night without payment up front. Ayla had 3 coins left in her pocket, not even enough for supper. She straightened and looked down the main street of Hollow Creek. It wasn't much of a town. A saloon, a livery, a church with peeling paint, and a dozen other buildings that looked like they were one strong wind away from collapse. Beyond that, nothing but open land stretching toward mountains she couldn't name. The wagon master had said Hollow Creek was growing. That was a lie. This was a place people left, not a place they stayed. "Come on." She took Evan's hand and started walking, though she didn't have a destination. Just movement, because standing still made the panic rise faster. They passed the saloon, and a man leaning against the post outside whistled low. "Well now, ain't you a sorry sight?" Ayla kept walking. "I'm talking to you, lady." She stopped, turned. The man was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted into a smirk. 2 other men sat on the saloon steps behind him, watching. "You lost?" he asked. "No." "You look lost. Lost and broke, and about 1 meal away from desperate." He pushed off the post and took a step closer. "Lucky for you, the lucky dollar's always hiring. We could use a woman who knows how to smile pretty." One of the men on the steps laughed. "She don't look like she smiles much, Doyle." "That's 'cause she ain't met me yet." Doyle grinned at her, and Ayla saw the cruelty underneath it. Saw how much he was enjoying this. She should have walked away. Should have taken Evan and disappeared down a side street, but something in her had cracked back in the mercantile, and now she was too tired to run. "I'm not interested," she said flatly. "Didn't ask if you were interested." Doyle took another step. "Asked if you were desperate. And lady, you got desperate written all over you." "Leave her alone, Doyle." The new voice came from behind Ayla. She turned and saw a man standing in the doorway of the general store across the street. He was older, maybe 60, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Doyle's smirk faltered. "Just offering the lady a job, Sheriff." "Offering her insults is what you're doing." The sheriff crossed the street slowly, like he had all the time in the world. When he reached Ayla, he tipped his hat. "Ma'am, you need help?" Ayla wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she was fine, that she didn't need anyone's pity, but Evan's hand was still in hers, small and cold, and she wasn't fine. "I'm looking for work," she said quietly. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. His eyes were the color of old leather, and they didn't miss much. "You got experience?" "Cooking, cleaning, mending. My father was a veterinarian. I helped him for 15 years before he died." "A veterinarian?" The sheriff's eyebrows went up slightly. "That's unusual." "He didn't have sons. I was what he had." The sheriff nodded slowly like he was working through a problem. Behind him, Doyle and his friends had retreated back into the saloon. "What's your name?" "Ayla Mercer. This is my son, Evan." "I'm Sheriff Tom Madsen." He glanced down at Evan, then back at Ayla. "You just come in on the train from Fort Collins?" "Yes." "Lost your husband on the trail?" Ayla's throat tightened. "Yes." Madsen was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed, long and heavy. "I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Mercer. Hollow Creek's a hard town for a woman alone. Most folks here are barely hanging on themselves. There ain't a lot of charity to go around." "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance to work." "I understand that. But work's scarce, and the people who got it ain't eager to share." He hesitated. "There is one option, but I ain't sure it's a good one." Ayla felt something twist in her chest. "Tell me." Madsen looked uncomfortable. "You know the Callahan Ranch?" "No." "It's about 5 miles north of here, biggest spread in the territory. Rhett Callahan owns it. He's—" Madsen paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's a hard man. Lost his wife 2 years back, and it broke something in him. Doesn't come to town much anymore. Doesn't talk much when he does. But he's got a big operation out there, and he's always needing help. Then I'll go ask him." "It ain't that simple." Madsen shifted his weight. "Callahan's got a reputation. He's fair, I'll give him that, but he's cold, doesn't suffer fools, doesn't have patience for weakness, and he sure as hell doesn't have patience for people who waste his time." "I won't waste his time." "You might not mean to, but he's turned away a dozen men this year alone. Good men, strong men. He don't take on workers unless he's damn sure they'll pull their weight." Madsen looked at Evan again. "And he ain't known for being friendly to families." Ayla met his eyes. "If I don't find work today, my son and I won't eat tonight. So unless you've got a better option, Sheriff, I need to try." Madsen studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "North Road. Follow it till you see the iron gate. Can't miss it." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Madsen turned to leave, then stopped. "Mrs. Mercer? One more thing. When you talk to Callahan, don't beg, don't cry. Don't tell him how hard things have been. He don't care about hard luck stories. Just tell him what you can do and let him decide." Ayla nodded. "I understand." But she didn't, not really, not yet. Bye. The walk to the Callahan Ranch took 2 hours. Ayla had thought 5 miles wasn't far, but that was before she tried to walk it in boots that didn't fit right and a dress that caught on every piece of brush. Evan stumbled twice, and the second time he didn't get up right away. "I'm tired, Mama." "I know, baby. Just a little further." "My feet hurt." "Mine too." Ayla crouched down and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The sun was starting to sink, and the air was cooling, but not fast enough. "When we get there, you can rest. I promise." "What if he says no?" Ayla's chest tightened. "Then we'll figure something else out." Evan looked at her with those dark eyes that were too much like his father's, and she saw the question he didn't ask. What else is there? She didn't have an answer. They kept walking. The land around them was nothing but dry grass and scattered trees, and Ayla felt the emptiness of it like a weight. Back in Ohio, there had always been people nearby, neighbors, towns every few miles, but out here, the world felt big enough to swallow you whole. When they finally saw the gate, Ayla almost cried. It was iron, like Madsen had said, and taller than she'd expected. 2 posts on either side with a crossbeam between them, and hanging from the center was a sign burned into wood, Callahan Ranch. Beyond it, the land sloped down into a valley, and she could see buildings in the distance. A big house, a barn, corrals with horses inside. It looked like civilization, like safety. Ayla pushed the gate open and kept walking. The sun was nearly gone by the time they reached the main house. It was 2 stories, built from dark wood, with a porch that wrapped around the front. There were no lights in the windows, no sounds except the wind and the distant noise of animals. Ayla climbed the porch steps and knocked on the door. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. "Mama?" Evan whispered. "Maybe nobody's home." "Somebody's home." Ayla knocked a 3rd time, and this time she heard footsteps inside. Heavy, slow. The door opened. The man standing at the doorway was not what she'd expected. She'd pictured someone older, maybe gray-haired and stooped, but Rhett Callahan couldn't have been more than 35. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His eyes were pale gray, and they fixed on Ayla with the kind of intensity that made her want to step back. "What?" His voice was flat. Not a question, a statement. Ayla forced herself to speak. "Mr. Callahan, my name is Ayla Mercer. This is my son, Evan. I'm looking for work." Callahan didn't move, didn't blink. "No." He started to close the door. "Wait." Ayla put her hand on the door frame, and Callahan stopped, his eyes dropping to her hand like it was something offensive. "Please, just hear me." "I said no. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend clothes, tend animals, work a garden. I don't need much. Just enough to feed my son and a place to sleep. I got a cook, I got ranch hands. I don't need you." Callahan's voice was cold, but there was something underneath it. Exhaustion, maybe. Or anger so old it had turned into stone. Ayla's hand dropped. She felt Evan press against her leg again, and the weight of him was unbearable. "Mr. Callahan, I've got 3 cents to my name. The town won't hire me. The boarding house won't take us. If you turn me away, I don't know what we'll do." "Not my problem." "I know it's not." Ayla's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm asking anyway, please." Callahan stared at her. For a long moment, she thought he might actually slam the door in her face. But then his eyes shifted down to Evan, who was half hidden behind Ayla's skirt, staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. Something flickered across Callahan's face. Just for a second. Then it was gone. "You got experience with horses?" he asked. "My father was a veterinarian. I helped him with everything: horses, cattle, dogs, birthing, injuries, sickness." Callahan's eyes narrowed slightly. "That true?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." Ayla didn't move. She wasn't sure she'd heard him right. "You coming or not?" Callahan said, already walking away from the door. Ayla grabbed Evan's hand and stepped inside. The house was big. That was the first thing she noticed. High ceilings, wide hallways, furniture that looked expensive but dusty. It didn't feel like anyone lived here. It felt like a museum. Callahan led them through the main hall into a kitchen that was twice the size of the one Ayla had grown up with. There was a long table in the center, a stove against one wall, and shelves lined with jars and pots. A woman stood at the counter, chopping vegetables. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Ruth," Callahan said. "Feed them." Ruth turned, and her eyes went wide when she saw Ayla and Evan. "Who? Go-oo." "Don't ask." Callahan was already heading for the door. "Just feed them." He disappeared down the hallway, and Ayla heard a door slam somewhere in the house. Ruth stared after him, then turned back to Ayla. "Well, that's new." Ayla didn't know what to say. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and gestured toward the table. "Sit, both of you. I'll get you something." Ayla sank into a chair, and Evan climbed into the one beside her. She felt like she might pass out. Her legs were shaking, and her head felt too light. Ruth set 2 bowls of stew in front of them. It was the best thing Ayla had ever smelled. "Go on," Ruth said gently. "Eat." Evan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the spoon and started shoveling food into his mouth, like he was afraid it might disappear. Ayla wanted to tell him to slow down, but she couldn't. She was doing the same thing. Ruth watched them with an expression that was hard to read. After a moment, she sat down across from Ayla. "You got a name?" "Ayla Mercer. This is Evan." "Ruth Calloway. I cook for Mr. Callahan." She paused. "What did you say to him to make him let you in?" "I don't know. I just asked for work." Ruth snorted. "That man's turned away 24 people in the last year alone. He don't let strangers in this house." "He didn't seem happy about it." "He ain't happy about much." Ruth's voice softened. "How long you been traveling?" 2 months. "Where's your husband?" Ayla's throat closed. "Dead. Fever took him 3 weeks ago." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed Ayla's hand. "I'm sorry." Ayla nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They finished the stew in silence. When Evan's bowl was empty, he slumped against Ayla's side, his eyes already closing. Ruth stood and cleared the dishes. "I don't know what Mr. Callahan's planning," she said, "but you both look like you need sleep more than anything. There's a room upstairs you can use tonight." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank him. If he wakes up tomorrow and changes his mind, you'll be out on your ear before breakfast." Ayla didn't doubt it. Ruth led them upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. There was a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch. It was the nicest room Ayla had seen in months. "I'll bring you some water," Ruth said. "You need anything else? You come find me." "I will." Ruth left, and Ayla helped Evan onto the bed. He was asleep before she even got his boots off. She pulled a blanket over him and sat down on the edge of the mattress, her whole body trembling. She didn't cry. She didn't have the energy for it. She just sat there, listening to her son breathe, and tried not to think about how close they'd come to having nowhere at all. It's gets. Ayla woke to the sound of voices outside. She sat up, disoriented, and it took her a moment to remember where she was. The room was still dark, but she could see the faintest hint of dawn through the window. Evan was still asleep beside her, curled into a ball under the blanket. Ayla slipped out of bed and crossed to the window. Below, she could see men moving around the yard. Ranch hands, she guessed. There were maybe a dozen of them, all dressed in worn shirts and hats, leading horses out of the barn. She watched them for a moment, trying to get a sense of the operation. It was big, bigger than she'd realized last night. There were corrals everywhere, and beyond them, she could see cattle grazing in the distance. A knock on the door made her jump. "Mrs. Mercer?" It was Ruth's voice. "You awake?" Ayla crossed to the door and opened it. Ruth stood in the hallway, holding a tray with bread, butter, and 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you'd be up early," Ruth said. "Mr. Callahan wants to see you, soon as you're ready." Ayla's stomach twisted. "Did he say why?" "Nope. Just said to send you out to the barn when you were dressed." "All right, thank you." Ruth handed her the tray. "Eat first. You're going to need your strength." Ayla ate quickly, washing down the bread with coffee that was strong enough to make her teeth ache. Evan woke up halfway through and blinked at her, confused. "Where are we?" "The ranch. Remember? We came here last night." Evan's face cleared. "Oh, right. I need you to stay here for a little while, okay? I have to go talk to Mr. Callahan." "Can't I come?" "Not this time. I'll be back soon, I promise." Evan looked uncertain, but he nodded. Ayla smoothed down her dress as best she could and left the room. She found her way back downstairs and out the front door. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky pink and gold, and the air was cool enough to make her shiver. She crossed the yard toward the barn, her heart pounding. Inside, the barn was dim and smelled like hay and leather. There were stalls on either side, most of them occupied by horses. At the far end, she saw Callahan standing beside a black mare, running his hands over her legs. "Mr. Callahan?" He didn't look up. "You know anything about founder?" Ayla blinked. "Laminitis?" "Yeah. Some. My father treated it a few times. It's inflammation in the hoof, usually caused by overfeeding or overwork. Can be fatal if it's not caught early." Callahan finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable. This mare's got it. Been limping for 2 days. My foreman says she's done for. Ayla stepped closer and crouched down beside the horse. The mare shifted nervously, but Ayla spoke softly to her and ran her hands over the front legs. The hooves were warm, too warm. She's in pain, Ayla said, but it's not too late. If we soak her hooves in cold water, keep her off hard ground, and cut back her feed, she might recover. Might? I can't promise anything, but I've seen worse cases heal. Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened. All right, you'll handle it. Ayla looked up at him, surprised. You want me to treat her? You said you could. I can, but I thought. You want the job or not? Callahan's voice was sharp. Yes. Then prove it. You save this mare, I'll give you and your boy a place to stay and 3 meals a day. You fail, you're gone. Ayla stood slowly. That's fair. Good. There's a shack down by the creek. It's got a roof and a stove. You can use it. He turned and started walking toward the barn doors. Ruth will get you supplies. Don't waste them. I won't. Callahan stopped at the doors and looked back at her. One more thing. Don't get comfortable. This ain't charity. You're here to work, not to be coddled. You fall behind, you're done. Understood? Understood. He left without another word. Ayla stood there for a moment, staring at the mare. The horse looked back at her with dark, tired eyes. Looks like it's just you and me, Ayla said softly. The mare huffed. Ayla got to work. Bye, Motek. The next 3 days were the hardest of Ayla's life. She moved into the shack by the creek with Evan, and it was exactly what Callahan had promised. A roof, a stove, and nothing else. The walls were thin, the floor was dirt, and the whole place smelled like mildew. But it was theirs. Every morning, Ayla woke before dawn and went to the barn to check on the mare. She soaked the hooves in cold water, wrapped them in clean cloth, and made sure the horse stayed calm and still. It was slow, exhausting work, and the ranch hands watched her like she was insane. That horse is dead, one of them said on the second day. His name was Hank, and he had a scar running down the side of his face. You're wasting your time. Maybe, Ayla said, not looking up from the hoof she was wrapping. Callahan's going to throw you out when she don't recover. Then I'll leave. Hank snorted and walked away. But the mare didn't die. By the end of the 3rd day, the swelling in her hooves had gone down, and she was putting weight on her front legs again. By the 5th day, she was walking without limping. Ayla was in the barn checking on her when Callahan appeared. She's better, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Ayla said. She'll need another week of rest, but she'll recover fully. Callahan stared at the mare for a long time. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Ayla couldn't quite name. Good, he said finally. Then he turned and left. Ayla stood there, trembling with relief. She'd done it. She'd saved the horse. She'd bought them time. But she also knew deep down that this was only the beginning. That first week turned into 2, then 3, and Ayla learned quickly that surviving on the Callahan ranch meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. The ranch hands treated her like she was invisible most days, which was better than the alternative. When they did acknowledge her, it was usually to remind her that she didn't belong. Creek shack's for storage, not people, Hank said one morning when she came to the barn to check on the horses. He was leaning against a post, chewing tobacco. But I guess Callahan's got lower standards now. Ayla ignored him and kept walking. She'd learned that responding only made things worse. The shack was brutal, the stove barely worked, and the roof leaked when it rained, which it did almost every other night. Evan tried not to complain, but she could see it in his face. He was cold at night, hungry during the day, and lonely in a way that made her chest ache. Can I go see the horses? He asked one afternoon. Not today, baby. Why not? Because the ranch hands had made it clear that Evan wasn't welcome in the barn unless Ayla was working. Because she couldn't risk him getting in the way or causing trouble that would give Callahan a reason to throw them out. Because every single day on this ranch felt like walking on a frozen river, waiting for the ice to crack. Just not today, she said instead. Evan's face fell, but he didn't argue. Ayla hated herself for it. The main house was a different world. Ruth let her in sometimes to help with cooking or cleaning, and those hours were the only time Ayla felt halfway human. The house was enormous, filled with furniture that probably cost more than Ayla had earned in her entire life, but it felt empty, like a body without a soul. Callahan lived there alone, and she almost never saw him. He took his meals in his study, left before dawn, and came back after dark. When she did cross paths with him, he barely looked at her, just gave her curt instructions or asked about the horses. "The roan mare in stall 6, he said one evening when she was leaving the barn. "She's favoring her left rear leg." Ayla turned. Callahan was standing in the shadows near the tack room, and she hadn't even heard him approach. "I'll check her tomorrow morning," Ayla said. "Check her now." It wasn't a request. Ayla nodded and walked back into the barn. The roan was in the back corner, standing still but shifting her weight oddly. Ayla ran her hands down the leg and found the problem immediately, a stone wedged deep in the hoof. She grabbed a pick from the wall and worked it out carefully. The horse flinched but didn't pull away. "It's just a stone," Ayla called over her shoulder. "She'll be fine." Callahan appeared beside her so suddenly she jumped. He looked down at the hoof, then at Ayla. "You're good at this," he said. It was the first compliment he'd given her, if you could even call it that. "My father taught me well," Ayla said. "He teach you anything else useful?" "Like what?" "Like how to keep your mouth shut when people talk down to you." Ayla froze. She looked up at him, but his expression gave nothing away. "I heard what Hank said this morning," Callahan continued, "and I heard you didn't say a word back." "What was I supposed to say?" "Most people would have told him to go to hell." "Most people don't have a 7-year-old depending on them." Callahan studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Ayla stood there, gripping the hoof pick, trying to figure out what had just happened. The first real storm hit on a Tuesday night. Ayla woke to the sound of thunder so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. Rain pounded against the shack's roof, and within minutes, water was dripping through the ceiling onto the dirt floor. "Mama?" Evan's voice was small and scared. "It's okay. Just a storm." But it wasn't just a storm. The wind howled like something alive, and Ayla could hear branches snapping outside. She pulled Evan close and wrapped a blanket around both of them, trying to keep him warm. The leak got worse. Water pooled in the corner of the room, then spread across the floor. Ayla moved them to the other side, but it didn't help. Everything was getting wet. "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, baby, I know." She didn't sleep, just sat there holding Evan while the storm tore through the valley. When dawn finally came, the rain had stopped, but the damage was done. The shack was flooded, their blankets were soaked, and Ayla had never felt more hopeless in her life. She left Evan inside, told him to stay put, and went to the barn to start her morning work. The horses were restless from the storm, and it took her twice as long as usual to calm them down and check for injuries. She was finishing up with the black mare when she heard shouting outside. Ayla dropped the brush and ran. In the main corral, a group of ranch hands had gathered around something on the ground. Ayla pushed through them and saw Callahan kneeling in the mud beside a horse. Not just any horse, his horse. The big gray stallion she'd seen him ride every morning. The stallion was on its side, breathing hard, its eyes rolling with panic. There was a gash along its shoulder, deep and bleeding, and its front leg was bent at an angle that made Ayla's stomach turn. "It's done," Hank was saying. "Leg's broke. You gotta put it down." "No." Callahan's voice was flat, but there was something underneath it, something raw. "Boss, that horse ain't gonna make it. You're just making it suffer." "I said no." "Then you're a fool." Callahan looked up at Hank with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Get out of my sight." Hank held his ground for a second, then spat into the mud and walked away. The other ranch hands followed, muttering to each other. Ayla stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan." He didn't look at her, just kept his hand on the stallion's neck, stroking it like that would fix everything. "Let me see," Ayla said quietly. "You can't fix this." "Maybe not, but let me try." Callahan finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, and for the first time she saw the grief behind them. It wasn't about the horse. Not entirely. He stood and stepped back. Ayla knelt in the mud and ran her hands over the stallion's leg. The break was bad. Not the worst she'd seen, but close. The bone hadn't punctured the skin, which was good, but the leg was unstable. If the horse tried to stand, it would shatter completely. "I need wood for a splint," Ayla said, "and cloth. Lots of it. And something to sedate him so he doesn't panic." We don't have... Then find it. Ayla looked up at Callahan, and her voice came out harder than she'd intended. If you want this horse to live, you'll find it. For a moment, she thought he might tell her to leave. But then he turned and shouted orders at the ranch hands who were still lingering nearby. 20 minutes later, Ayla had everything she needed. She worked quickly, her hands steady even though her heart was pounding. She set the bone as carefully as she could, secured the splint, and wrapped it tight. The stallion fought her once, thrashing in the mud, but Callahan held its head down and spoke to it in a low, steady voice until it calmed. When Ayla finally sat back, her hands were covered in blood and mud. "That's all I can do," she said. "He needs to stay still for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. And even then, he might never run again." Callahan stared at the stallion. "But he'll live." "If the bone set's right, yes." Callahan nodded once. Then he turned and walked back toward the house without a word. Ayla stayed there in the mud, watching the stallion breathe. Ruth found her an hour later, still sitting beside the horse. "You look like hell," Ruth said. "Feel worse." Ruth crouched down beside her. "That was a damn fool thing you just did. He would have shot the horse. Maybe. But now if that stallion dies, it'll be on you." Ayla looked at Ruth. "I know." Ruth sighed and pulled Ayla to her feet. "Come on. You need to clean up and eat something. I need to check on Evan." "He's fine. I saw him earlier, gave him breakfast, and told him you'd be back soon." "Thank you." Ruth studied her for a moment. "You're tougher than you look." "I don't feel tough." "Nobody does." Ruth started walking toward the house, and Ayla followed. "You know that horse you just saved? That was Callahan's wife's favorite. She raised it from a foal. After she died, he couldn't bring himself to ride it for a year. When he finally did, it was the first time I saw him look like himself again." Ayla's chest tightened. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. Nobody tells you anything around here." Ruth pushed open the back door of the house. "But now you know. So maybe you'll understand why he's the way he is." Ayla didn't know what to say to that. Inside, Ruth sat her down at the kitchen table and poured her coffee. Then she disappeared into another room and came back with a bundle of cloth. "What's this?" Ayla asked. "Blankets. Yours are soaked, and you ain't going to dry them out in that shack. Take these." "I can't." "She can't." "Yes, you can. And before you argue, I'll tell you straight, I ain't doing this out of kindness. I'm doing it because if you or your boy get sick, it'll be more work for me." Ruth set the blankets on the table. "So take them, and don't make it a big thing." Ayla's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded. Ruth turned back to the stove. "You're going to stay for supper, you and Evan both. I made too much stew and I ain't wasting it." "Okay? And tomorrow, you're moving into the bunkhouse." Ayla looked up sharply. "What?" "The shack's a death trap. I told Callahan this morning and he agreed. There's a room in the back of the bunkhouse that nobody's using. It's small, but it's got a real roof and a door that locks. You'll take it." "Did he really agree to that?" "Would I be telling you if he didn't?" Ayla didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Thank you." "Stop thanking me. Just do your job and don't make me regret it." But Ayla could see the faint smile tugging at the corner of Ruth's mouth. The bunkhouse was better than the shack, but not by much. The room Ruth gave them was barely big enough for a bed and a small dresser, and the walls were thin enough that Ayla could hear every word the ranch hand said in the main room. Most of it wasn't pleasant. "Callahan's losing his mind," someone said the first night. "Letting that woman and her brat move in here." "She saved his horse," another voice replied. "That counts for something." "Counts for nothing if she's just another mouth to feed." Ayla lay in the dark, listening, and tried to tune it out. Beside her, Evan was already asleep, curled up under the new blankets Ruth had given them. He looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. She closed her eyes and tried to believe that things might actually get better. The stallion survived. After 2 weeks, it was standing again. After 4, it was walking slowly around the corral. And after 6, Callahan rode it for the first time since the accident. Ayla watched from the barn as he led the horse out into the open field. The stallion moved carefully, favoring the injured leg, but it moved. Callahan rode slowly, almost gently, like he was afraid the horse might break under him. When he came back, he dismounted and stood there for a long time with his hand on the horse's neck. "Thank you," he said without looking at Ayla. She didn't know what to say. So she just nodded and went back to work. But something had shifted. Callahan started acknowledging her when she passed him in the yard, started asking her opinion on the other horses, and one night he stopped by the bunkhouse and left a bundle of firewood outside her door. No note, no explanation, just firewood. Ayla stared at it for a long time before carrying it inside. The town started talking. Of course they did. A widow living on Callahan land, working with his horses, moving into the bunkhouse. People had opinions about that. Ayla heard the whispers when she went into Hollow Creek to buy supplies. Women stared at her in the mercantile. Men smirked at her in the street. And one afternoon, a woman Ayla didn't recognize stopped her outside the general store. "You're the one staying out at the Callahan place," the woman said. She was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Yes," Ayla said. "Interesting." The woman looked her up and down. "You know people are talking." "I'm sure they are. They're saying you've got your hooks in him, that you're trying to trap yourself a rich man." Ayla's jaw tightened. "Then they're saying nonsense." "Are they?" The woman stepped closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you went from begging on his doorstep to living under his roof real quick." "I'm living in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, and I'm working for my keep." "That what you call it?" Ayla wanted to walk away, wanted to ignore this woman and everything she represented. But she was tired. Tired of being judged. Tired of defending herself to people who'd already made up their minds. "I call it surviving," Ayla said quietly, "which is more than this town was willing to let me do." The woman's expression didn't change. "Watch yourself, Mrs. Mercer. Rhett Callahan might be rich, but he's not stupid. And when he figures out what you really are, you'll be back on the street where you belong." She walked away before Ayla could respond. Ayla stood there shaking and realized that nothing she did would ever be enough for these people. She could work until her hands bled, could save every horse on that ranch, could prove herself 100 times over, and they would still see her as the desperate widow who didn't deserve what she had. She went back to the ranch and didn't leave again for 2 weeks. Callahan noticed. Of course he did. "You haven't been to town," he said one evening when she was finishing up in the barn. "Don't need to." "Ruth says you're running low on thread." "I'll manage." Callahan leaned against the stall door, watching her. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Don't lie to me." Ayla stopped working and looked at him. "People talk. That's what happened, and I'm tired of listening." "What are they saying?" "Does it matter?" "It does if it's bothering you." Ayla laughed, bitter and sharp. "They think I'm using you, that I'm some kind of opportunist who crawled onto your land to trap you into something." Callahan's expression darkened. "Who said that?" "Does it matter?" Ayla repeated. "It's what they all think. I see it every time I go into town, the way they look at me, like I'm dirt." "You're not. I know that, but they don't." Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened. "Don't go to town anymore. If you need something, tell Ruth. She'll get it." "That's not a solution." "It's the only one I've got." He left before she could argue. Ayla stood there, gripping a bridle so hard her knuckles turned white, and wondered how much longer she could keep doing this. The answer came sooner than she expected. 3 days later, Callahan called her up to the main house. Ruth let her in and pointed toward the study. "He wants to talk to you," Ruth said. "Don't ask me why." Ayla knocked on the study door, and Callahan's voice called out, "Come in." The study was dark, lined with bookshelves and heavy furniture. Callahan was sitting behind a desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered. "Sit," he said. Ayla sat. Callahan leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "You've been here 2 months." "Yes." "You've worked harder than half the men I've got on payroll. You saved 2 horses that would have been put down, and you haven't complained once about the conditions." Ayla didn't know where this was going. "I'm just doing what you hired me to do." "No. You're doing more than that." Callahan paused. "I'm making you the ranch's head animal handler. You'll oversee all the horses and livestock. You'll report directly to me, and your pay will reflect that." Ayla stared at him. "I don't understand." "What's not to understand?" "Why?" "Because you're good at what you do, and because I'm tired of watching you work twice as hard for half the respect." Ayla's throat tightened. "The men won't like this." "I don't care what the men like. They already resent me. Then they can leave. Callahan's voice was flat. This is my ranch. I make the decisions, and I've decided you're more valuable than the lot of them. Ayla didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. Good. Callahan looked back down at the papers on his desk. That's all. Ayla stood and started to leave, but when she reached the door, she stopped. Mr. Callahan? What? Thank you. He didn't look up. Don't thank me. Just keep doing your job. But when Ayla left the study, she could have sworn she saw the faintest hint of a smile on his face. The promotion changed everything, and not in the way Ayla had hoped. Within a week, half the ranch hands stopped speaking to her entirely. The other half made it clear they thought Callahan had lost his mind. Woman's got no business running livestock, one of them muttered loud enough for her to hear as she walked past the corral. Ayla kept her head down and kept working. She didn't have the luxury of caring what they thought, but it wore on her. Every decision she made was questioned. Every instruction she gave was ignored or challenged. And when one of the younger hands deliberately left a gate open and 3 horses got loose, Ayla knew it wasn't an accident. She found Callahan in the barn that afternoon, checking on the gray stallion. We need to talk, she said. He looked up. About what? About the fact that your men are sabotaging me. That's a strong accusation. It's the truth. Someone left the west gate open this morning. 3 horses got out. It took me 2 hours to get them back. Callahan's jaw tightened. Who? I don't know, but it wasn't an accident. You got proof? No, just common sense. Ayla crossed her arms. Look, I know you gave me this job because you think I can do it, and I can. But your men aren't going to let me, not unless you make it clear that they don't have a choice. Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened and walked past her toward the bunkhouse. Ayla followed. He pushed open the door and found most of the ranch hands inside, playing cards and drinking coffee. The room went silent when they saw him. Listen up, Callahan said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Mrs. Mercer's in charge of the animals on this ranch. That means when she gives you an order, you follow it. You don't question it, you don't ignore it, and you sure as hell don't sabotage her work. Hank leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That's a pretty big accusation, boss. It's a fact. And the next man who causes a problem is gone. No warnings, no second chances. You're fired and off my land by sunset. Callahan's eyes swept the room. Understood? Nobody spoke, but Ayla could see the resentment burning in their faces. I said, understood? Callahan repeated, louder this time. A few muttered agreements. Hank just stared at the floor. Callahan turned and left. Ayla followed him outside, her heart pounding. That's not going to help, she said quietly. It will. No. It'll just make them hate me more. Callahan stopped walking and turned to face her. I don't care if they hate you. I care if they respect you, and if they won't give you respect, they'll damn sure give you fear. That's not how I want to lead. Then you'll fail. His voice was hard. These men don't care about fairness. They care about power. And if you don't take it, they'll walk all over you. Ayla opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat, because part of her knew he was right. I'm not like you, she said finally. I can't just demand things and expect people to fall in line. Why not? Because I'm a woman, and a widow, and an outsider. And no matter what you say, that's always going to matter to them. Callahan studied her for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. You're right. It will matter. But that doesn't mean you can't make them listen. How? By being better than them. By working harder. By proving every single day that you deserve to be here. He paused. And by not letting them see you doubt yourself. I don't doubt myself. Yes, you do. I see it every time someone challenges you. You hesitate. You second guess. And they see that weakness. Ayla's chest tightened. I'm trying. I know. But trying isn't enough. Callahan's voice softened just slightly. You're good at what you do, Mrs. Mercer. Better than anyone I've had in 20 years. But if you want them to see that, you need to stop apologizing for taking up space. He walked away before she could respond. Ayla stood there, his words echoing in her head, and realized he was right. She had been apologizing. For existing. For needing help. For daring to take the job he'd offered her. She made a decision right then. She was done apologizing. The next morning, Ayla walked into the barn and found two of the ranch hands ignoring her instructions about feeding schedules. They were giving the horses twice the grain they needed, which would lead to colic or worse. "Stop," Ayla said. They didn't even look at her. "I said stop." One of them, a man named Turner, finally glanced her way. "We've been feeding these horses for years. We know what we're doing. You're overfeeding them. If you keep this up, half of them will be sick by tomorrow." "That's your opinion. It's a fact." Ayla stepped forward and took the grain bucket out of Turner's hands. "And I'm in charge, so you'll do it my way, or you'll leave." Turner's face darkened. "You threatening me? I'm telling you how it is." For a moment, she thought he might actually hit her, but then Hank appeared in the doorway. "Turner," Hank said, "do what she says." Turner looked at Hank like he'd been betrayed. "You're taking her side?" "I'm taking the side that keeps me employed." Hank's voice was flat. "Now do your damn job." Turner threw the bucket on the ground and stormed out. Ayla stood there, her hands shaking, and tried to catch her breath. Hank picked up the bucket and handed it back to her. "You're going to make a lot of enemies doing this." "I don't care." "You should." Hank looked at her for a long moment. "But for what it's worth, you were right. About the grain, and about the gate." Ayla blinked. "You know who left it open?" "Yeah, I ain't going to tell you, though. You want respect? You got to earn it yourself." He walked out before she could respond. Ayla stood there, holding the grain bucket, and realized something important. She wasn't just fighting for respect anymore. She was fighting to survive. Spring turned into summer, and the ranch settled into a rhythm. The horses thrived under Ayla's care, and even the most stubborn ranch hands started following her instructions without argument. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was progress. Callahan noticed. He started asking for her input on things beyond the animals. Which pastures to rotate, how to handle a difficult buyer, whether they should expand the breeding program. "You've got a good head for this," he said one evening as they stood on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the valley. "I'm just using what my father taught me." "It's more than that." Callahan glanced at her. "You see things other people miss." "That's rare." Ayla didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. They stood in silence for a while. Then Callahan said, "You ever think about what you'll do after this?" "After what?" "After the ranch. After Evan grows up. After you don't need this place anymore." Ayla looked at him, surprised. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Why not?" "Because I'm too busy trying to survive today." Callahan nodded slowly. "Fair enough." But the question stayed with Ayla long after he went back inside. What would she do after this? She'd spent so long just trying to keep her head above water that she hadn't considered a future beyond the next meal or the next paycheck. The thought was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. The town gathering happened every year in late June. It was the one day when everyone from the surrounding ranches and farms came together to trade, gossip, and pretend they were more civilized than they actually were. Ruth told Ayla about it over breakfast one morning. "You should come," Ruth said. "It's good for business. Callahan always goes to talk with the other ranchers." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because the last time I was in town, people made it very clear I wasn't welcome." Ruth waved a hand dismissively. "That was months ago. Things are different now. People know you're working for Callahan, that you're good at what you do. They'll treat you better." Ayla wasn't convinced, but when Callahan asked her to come the next day, she couldn't think of a good reason to refuse. The gathering was held in the center of town, in a cleared area between the church and the mercantile. There were tables set up with food and goods for trade, and a makeshift stage where someone was playing a fiddle. The whole place was packed with people, more than Ayla had seen since arriving in Hollow Creek. She stayed close to Callahan and Ruth, trying to make herself invisible, but it didn't work. Within 10 minutes, a woman approached them. She was younger than Ayla, maybe 25, with blonde hair and a dress that looked like it cost more than Ayla made in a month. She was beautiful in a way that made Ayla feel small. "Rhett," the woman said, smiling. "I was hoping you'd come." Callahan nodded. "Beatrice." Beatrice. Ayla had heard that name before. This was Beatrice Harlow, the widow Ruth had mentioned once in passing, the woman whose daughter was supposed to marry Callahan before everything fell apart. Beatrice's eyes slid to Ayla, and the smile didn't waver. "And who's this?" "Ayla Mercer," Callahan said. "She runs the livestock on my ranch." "How progressive of you." Beatrice's tone was light, but there was an edge underneath it. "I didn't realize you were hiring women now." "I hire people who can do the job." "Of course." Beatrice turned her attention back to Ayla. "You're the widow everyone's been talking about, the one who showed up with nothing." Ayla's jaw tightened. "That's me." "Well, you've certainly made quite an impression, living on Callahan land, working with his horses. Some people are saying you've worked your way into more than just a job." The implication was clear. Ayla felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Callahan stepped forward. "Watch yourself, Beatrice." Beatrice's smile widened. "I'm just repeating what people are saying, Rhett. You know how this town talks." "Then maybe you should stop listening." For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Then Beatrice laughed, light and fake. "Of course, I didn't mean any offense." She glanced at Ayla one more time. "It was lovely to meet you, Mrs. Mercer. I'm sure we'll see more of each other." She walked away and Ayla let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Don't let her get to you," Ruth said quietly. "She's been bitter ever since Callahan turned down her daughter." "She seems like more than bitter." "She is. Beatrice Harlow runs half this town. She's got money, connections, and a grudge the size of Texas. And now she's decided you're a threat." "I'm not a threat to anyone." "She doesn't see it that way." Ruth glanced at Callahan, who was staring after Beatrice with an unreadable expression. "And neither does half the town." Ayla wanted to leave, wanted to go back to the ranch and pretend this whole day had never happened. But before she could suggest it, a man climbed onto the stage and called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to this year's gathering. We've got food, music, and good company, and I hope you'll all enjoy yourselves." He paused. "Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of the hardworking folks who make this community what it is." He started listing names: ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers. People clapped politely after each one. Then he said, "And I'd also like to recognize Rhett Callahan, whose ranch continues to be one of the most successful in the territory." The applause was louder this time. Callahan nodded, but didn't move. "I'd also like to recognize someone new to our community," the man continued. "Ayla Mercer, who's been working on the Callahan ranch and making quite a name for herself." The applause was scattered. A few people clapped. Most didn't. Ayla felt every eye in the crowd turn toward her. She wanted to disappear. Then Beatrice's voice cut through the noise. "Yes, Mrs. Mercer has certainly made a name for herself, though I'm not sure it's the kind of name we should be celebrating." The crowd went silent. Ayla's stomach dropped. Beatrice stepped forward, her smile sharp as a knife. "I think we all know what's really going on here. A desperate widow shows up with nothing, begs her way onto Callahan land, and suddenly she's running his ranch. It's quite the story." "That's enough," Callahan said, his voice low and dangerous. "Is it?" Beatrice looked around at the crowd. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. This woman comes from nothing. Her family has no reputation, no connections. And yet she's managed to worm her way into one of the most powerful households in the territory. How exactly did she manage that?" "By working," Ayla said, her voice shaking. "By proving I could do the job, or by doing something else entirely." Beatrice's eyes glittered. "Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, how much time do you spend in the main house, alone with Mr. Callahan?" The crowd murmured. Ayla felt the ground tilt under her feet. "You don't know what you're talking about," Ayla said. "Don't I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you saw an opportunity and you took it. A rich man. A lonely man. A man who's been grieving for 2 years and doesn't know better." Beatrice stepped closer. "You're not the first woman to try this, Mrs. Mercer, and you won't be the last. But the difference is, the rest of us see you for what you are." "And what's that?" Ayla's voice was barely a whisper. "A parasite." The word hung in the air like a slap. Ayla couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The whole crowd was staring at her, and she could see the judgment in their faces. The doubt, the disgust. She waited for Callahan to say something, to defend her, to tell Beatrice she was wrong. But he didn't. He just stood there, his face unreadable, and said nothing. The silence stretched on, and Ayla realized with a sinking feeling that he wasn't going to speak, that he was going to let Beatrice's words stand. "Excuse me," Ayla said, her voice cracking. She turned and walked away before anyone could see her cry. She made it to the edge of town before the tears came. She leaned against a tree and let them fall, hot and angry and full of shame. She'd been stupid to think things had changed, stupid to think she could ever be anything more than the desperate widow people saw when they looked at her. "Mama?" Ayla looked up and saw Evan standing a few feet away. He must have followed her from the gathering. "I'm okay, baby," she lied, wiping her face. "That lady was mean." "I know." Evan walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I don't think you're a parasite." Ayla's chest tightened. She hugged him back hard. "Thank you." They stood there for a long time, and Ayla tried to figure out what to do next. She couldn't go back to the gathering, couldn't face those people again. But she also couldn't stay here forever. She needed to leave. Not just the town, the ranch. All of it. It was the only way to protect what little dignity she had left. That night, Ayla packed what little they owned into 2 bags. It didn't take long. They didn't have much. She waited until everyone was asleep, then woke Evan and told him they were leaving. "Why?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Because it's time." "But I like it here." "I know, but we can't stay." Evan looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He just nodded and let her help him get dressed. They were halfway to the barn when Ayla heard a sound behind her. She turned and saw Ruth standing in the doorway of the bunkhouse, wrapped in a shawl. "You're leaving," Ruth said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Because of what Beatrice said." "Because of what everyone thinks." Ruth sighed. "You're making a mistake." "No, I made a mistake staying this long. Callahan didn't mean to. He didn't defend me." Ayla's voice broke. "He stood there and let that woman humiliate me in front of the entire town. He let her call me a parasite, and he said nothing." Ruth looked at her with something like pity. "He's a coward when it comes to things like this. Always has been. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care. If he cared, he would have said something. Maybe. Or maybe he didn't know what to say." Ruth stepped closer. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if you leave now, you're proving Beatrice right. You're proving that you don't belong here, and I know for a fact that's not true." Ayla shook her head. "It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe." "Then change what they believe." "How?" Ruth didn't have an answer for that. Ayla turned and kept walking. She made it to the barn, saddled one of the horses, and lifted Evan onto its back. Then she climbed up behind him and started riding toward the main gate. She didn't look back. Couldn't. If she did, she might lose her nerve. They were almost to the gate when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and saw Callahan riding toward them on the gray stallion. "Stop!" he called. Ayla kept riding. "Ayla, stop!" She pulled the reins and the horse slowed to a halt. Callahan rode up beside her, his face hard. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Away." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Callahan's jaw tightened. "You're running." "I'm leaving. There's a difference." "No, there's not. You're running because Beatrice said some cruel things, and you're too scared to stand up to her." Ayla's temper flared. "I'm not scared. I'm smart. There's no point in staying somewhere I'm not wanted." "You're wanted." "By who? You?" Ayla laughed bitterly. "You didn't even defend me. You just stood there like a statue while she tore me apart." "I know." Callahan's voice was rough. "And I'm sorry." Ayla stared at him, shocked. She hadn't expected that. "I should have said something," Callahan continued. "Should have told Beatrice to go to hell. But I didn't, and that was wrong." "Why didn't you?" Callahan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I didn't want them to think she was right." "What?" "If I defended you, it would have looked like I was protecting you because we're—" He trailed off, struggling with the words. "Because we're more than employer and employee. And I didn't want to give them that ammunition." Ayla's chest tightened. "So you sacrificed me to protect your reputation?" "No, I sacrificed you because I'm a coward." Callahan's voice was raw. "And I'm sorry." Ayla didn't know what to say. The anger was still there, burning hot in her chest, but it was mixed with something else now, something she didn't want to name. "I can't stay here,"
she said quietly. Not after what happened. Yes, you can.
No, I can't. Because every time I go into town, every time I see those people, I'll remember what Beatrice said. And I'll remember that you didn't stop her. Then don't go into town. Don't see those people. Stay on the ranch and do the work you're good at. That's not a solution. It's the only one I've got. Callahan's voice softened. Ayla, I need you here. The ranch needs you, and whether you believe it or not, I do care what happens to you. Then prove it. How? Ayla didn't know. She just knew that words weren't enough anymore. Before she could answer, a shout came from the direction of town. Both of them turned and saw a man on horseback riding toward the ranch, fast and frantic. Callahan, the man yelled. We need help. It's the Turner boy. He's dying. Ayla's first instinct was to keep riding, to let someone else handle whatever crisis had erupted in town. She tried to help these people, tried to earn their respect, and all it had gotten her was humiliation and heartbreak. They didn't deserve her help. But then the man on horseback got closer, and she recognized him. It was Samuel Turner, the ranch hand who'd challenged her in the barn months ago. His face was pale, streaked with tears, and his voice cracked when he spoke. Please, my boy's burning up with fever. We don't know what to do. The doc's 3 towns over, and we can't wait that long. He looked at Ayla, desperate. Ruth said you know medicine, said your father was a veterinarian. Please. He's only 6 years old. Ayla felt Evan's small body pressed against her back, felt the weight of her bags packed for leaving, felt every rational reason to say no. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. Where is he? Our house, half-mile past the church. Ayla looked at Callahan. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Go, he said quietly. I'll take Evan back to the ranch. Mama, no, Evan whispered, clutching her dress. It's okay, baby. Mr. Callahan will take care of you. I have to help someone. She twisted in the saddle and looked at her son. Remember what I told you? Sometimes we have to do hard things, even when we're scared. Evan's eyes were wet, but he nodded. Ayla handed him down to Callahan, who settled the boy in front of him on the stallion. Then she turned her horse and followed Turner back toward town. They rode hard, and the gathering was still going when they passed through the main street. People stared as Ayla galloped by, her hair coming loose from its bun, her dress covered in road dust. She didn't care, didn't slow down. The Turner house was small, barely more than a cabin, set back from the road in a cluster of cottonwood trees. Turner's wife met them at the door, her face red and swollen from crying. Thank heaven you came, she said, grabbing Ayla's arm and pulling her inside. The house was dim and hot, the air thick with the smell of sweat and sickness. A small boy lay on a bed in the corner, covered in blankets despite the heat. His face was flushed dark red, his breathing shallow and fast. Ayla crossed to him and pressed her hand to his forehead. He was burning up, hotter than anyone should be and still be breathing. How long has he been like this? Ayla asked. Since yesterday morning, Turner's wife said. Started with a cough, then the fever came on fast. We tried cold water, tried willow bark tea, but nothing's working. Ayla pulled back the blankets and examined the boy. His chest rattled when he breathed, and there was a blue tinge to his lips. She'd seen this before. Pneumonia, probably, or something close to it. Her father had treated dozens of cases, most of them in animals, but the principles were the same. I need boiling water, clean cloths, and honey if you have it, Ayla said, and I need someone to go to the Callahan ranch and bring back my medical bag. It's in my room in the bunkhouse. Tell Ruth I sent you. Turner nodded and ran out the door. Ayla turned back to the boy. His eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused. She didn't even know his name. What's he called? She asked. Matthew, his mother whispered. Matthew, can you hear me? The boy didn't respond. Ayla started working. She stripped off the extra blankets, ignoring the mother's protests, and sponged Matthew's body with cool water. The fever needed to come down or it would kill him before anything else could. Turner's wife hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Is he going to die? Ayla wanted to lie, wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but she'd never been good at lying. I don't know, she said, but I'm going to do everything I can. The next hour was a blur. Ayla worked mechanically, doing everything her father had taught her. She got the fever down a few degrees, forced some honey water down the boy's throat to keep him from dehydrating, and propped him up so his lungs could drain better. It wasn't enough. She could feel it in her gut. Without real medicine, without the tools her father had always kept in his practice, she was working blind. Turner came back with her bag, and Ayla tore through it looking for anything useful. She found dried herbs she'd been saving, a small vial of camphor oil, and some clean bandages. It would have to be enough. She made a poultice for his chest, mixing the camphor oil with hot water and spreading it on a cloth. Then she laid it over Matthew's ribs and covered him with a single light blanket. The vapor would help him breathe, if she'd mixed it right. "What else can we do?" Turner asked. He was standing in the corner looking lost and useless. "Pray," his wife said. Ayla bit her tongue. Prayer wouldn't save this boy. Medicine would. Or luck. Or both. She sat down beside the bed and kept watch. Hours passed. The sun set. Someone lit lanterns, and the small house filled with flickering shadows. Matthew's breathing stayed shallow and labored, and twice Ayla thought he'd stopped breathing entirely. Each time, she shook him gently, and he gasped back to life. "Why isn't he getting better?" Turner's wife asked, her voice breaking. "He is," Ayla lied. "It's just slow." But she wasn't sure. Wasn't sure of anything except that this boy was fighting for every breath and she was running out of ideas. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Turner opened it, and Callahan stepped inside. He looked around the small room, his eyes landing on Ayla. "How is he?" "Not good," Ayla said quietly. Callahan crossed to the bed and looked down at Matthew. His face was unreadable, but Ayla saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or memory. "What do you need?" he asked. "A miracle." "Besides that," Ayla shook her head. "I've done everything I know how to do. If he doesn't improve in the next few hours—" She trailed off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Callahan pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "Then we wait. You don't have to stay. Neither do you, but here we are." Ayla didn't have the energy to argue. She just went back to monitoring Matthew's breathing, counting each rise and fall of his small chest. Callahan stayed. So did Turner and his wife. The four of them sat in that cramped, hot room, watching a little boy fight for his life, and nobody spoke. Around 3 in the morning, something changed. Matthew's breathing evened out. The blue tinge left his lips, and when Ayla pressed her hand to his forehead, she felt the fever breaking. "He's cooling down," she whispered. Turner's wife let out a sob and grabbed her husband's hand. Ayla didn't celebrate, didn't relax. She'd seen fevers break before, only to come roaring back hours later. She needed to be sure. She stayed by Matthew's side through the rest of the night, checking his pulse, listening to his breathing, making sure the improvement was real. By dawn, she was sure. The boy was going to live. Turner's wife fell to her knees beside the bed and started crying. Turner just stood there, staring at his son like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Ayla said. She stood up, her back aching, her hands shaking from exhaustion. "Just make sure he rests for the next few days. Keep him hydrated. If the fever comes back, send for me." "I will." Turner looked at her, and there was something in his face that Ayla had never seen before. Respect. "I'm sorry for what I said before, for how I treated you." Ayla didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Callahan stood and touched her elbow. "Come on, I'll take you back." They left the Turner house as the sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold. Ayla climbed onto her horse, and Callahan rode beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Callahan broke the silence. "You could have let him die." Ayla looked at him, shocked. "No, I couldn't. After what happened at the gathering, nobody would have blamed you. Turner's been nothing but cruel to you since the day you arrived." "That doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because he's a person, and his son is a child, and I'm not going to let a child die just to prove a point." Ayla's voice was hard. "That's not who I am." Callahan studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "No, it's not." They rode in silence the rest of the way back to the ranch. When they arrived, Ruth was waiting on the porch with Evan. The boy ran to Ayla the moment she dismounted, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." Did you save him? Yes. Evan's face lit up. I knew you would. Ayla wished she had his faith. Ruth herded them all inside and made breakfast. Ayla ate without tasting anything, her body running on instinct. When she finished, she went to her room in the bunkhouse and collapsed onto the bed. She slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke, it was late afternoon, and the light coming through the window was soft and golden. Ayla sat up slowly, her whole body aching, and tried to piece together what had happened. She'd saved Matthew Turner. She'd stayed on the ranch instead of leaving. And Callahan had apologized. She didn't know what any of it meant. There was a knock on the door, and Ruth stuck her head in. You awake? Barely. Good, you've got visitors. Who? Come see for yourself. Ayla dragged herself out of bed and followed Ruth to the main house. When she stepped onto the porch, she stopped dead. There were at least 20 people standing in the yard. Men, women, children. Some of them she recognized from town. Others she'd never seen before. And at the front of the group was Samuel Turner holding his son's hand. Matthew looked pale and thin, but he was standing, smiling even. Mrs. Mercer, Turner said, we wanted to thank you. All of us. Ayla looked around at the crowd, confused. For what? For saving my boy. For proving us all wrong. Turner's voice cracked. We've been cruel to you, judgmental. We didn't give you a chance because we didn't think you deserved one, but you do, and we're sorry. A woman stepped forward. Ayla recognized her as the one who'd snickered in the mercantile months ago. You saved that boy even after everything we said about you. That takes a kind of strength most of us don't have. Another man spoke up. Words spread all over the territory about what you did. People are calling you a miracle worker. Ayla shook her head. I'm not a miracle worker. I'm just someone who knows a little medicine. You're more than that, Turner said. And we want you to know that if you ever need anything, any of us, you just ask. We owe you. Ayla didn't know what to say. For months, these people had looked at her like she was dirt. And now they were standing in front of her, offering respect. It didn't feel real. Thank you, she managed finally. The crowd started to disperse, but Turner lingered. He looked at Ayla for a long moment, then said, I told Callahan he's a damn fool if he lets you go, just so you know. He walked away before Ayla could respond. She stood there on the porch, watching them leave, and felt something shift inside her chest. She'd spent so long fighting to survive, fighting to prove herself, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, really seen, not as a burden or a threat, but as a person who mattered. You all right? Ruth's voice came from behind her. Ayla turned. I don't know. That's fair, Ruth smiled. But for what it's worth, I think you just earned yourself a place in this town, whether you want it or not. Ayla wasn't sure she did want it, but she couldn't deny that it felt good. Over the next few days, everything changed. People who'd ignored her in town now stopped to talk. Women asked her advice about sick children or injured animals. Men tipped their hats when she passed. The transformation was so sudden and complete that Ayla barely knew how to handle it. The ranch hands noticed too. Hank started greeting her in the mornings. Turner apologized again, this time in front of the whole crew, and told them that anyone who disrespected Ayla would answer to him. It was awkward and clumsy, but it was genuine. Even the work felt different. The horses responded to her better, the ranch ran smoother, and for the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek, Ayla felt like she belonged somewhere. But the biggest change was with Callahan. He started spending more time around her, not in an obvious way, but in small moments that added up. He'd show up in the barn while she was working and ask her opinion on things that had nothing to do with animals. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings, and she'd find herself sitting beside him, talking about everything and nothing. He started eating meals in the kitchen instead of his study, and more often than not, Ayla and Evan were there too. One evening, about a week after the incident with Matthew Turner, Callahan asked Ayla to walk with him. They left Evan with Ruth and headed out toward the creek where the light was fading and the air was cool. They walked in silence for a while, and then Callahan said, I've been thinking about what you said, about proving I care. Ayla's heart skipped. And? And you were right. Words aren't enough. He stopped walking and turned to face her. I should have defended you at that gathering. Should have told Beatrice and everyone else to go to hell. I didn't, and I regret it. But I want you to know something. What?
You're not a parasite. You're not an opportunist. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and this ranch is better because you're here. Ayla's throat tightened. You don't have to say that.
I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. Callahan's voice was rough. I don't know what I'm doing here, Ayla. I haven't known what I'm doing since my wife died. But I know that when you were about to leave, it felt like losing something I didn't know I needed. Ayla stared at him. Rhett. It was the first time she'd used his first name. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that scared her. I'm not asking you for anything, Callahan continued. I just wanted you to know that you matter, to the ranch, to Evan, to me. Ayla didn't know what to say. Her chest felt too full, her emotions too tangled to sort through. Part of her wanted to step closer. Part of her wanted to run. Before she could decide, Callahan took a step back. We should head back. It's getting dark. They walked back to the ranch in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Not empty, full. That night, Ayla lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying Callahan's words over and over. She'd spent so long convincing herself that survival was enough, that keeping her head down and taking care of Evan was all that mattered. But now, for the first time in years, she wanted something more. She wanted to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The realization terrified her. A few days later, Beatrice Harlow showed up at the ranch. Ayla was in the barn when Ruth came running to find her. You need to come to the house. Now. Why? Because Beatrice is here, and she's asking for you. Ayla's stomach dropped. What does she want? I don't know, but Callahan's with her, and it doesn't look friendly. Ayla followed Ruth to the main house, her heart pounding. When she stepped inside, she found Beatrice standing in the parlor, looking around like she owned the place. Callahan stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face hard. Beatrice turned when Ayla entered. Mrs. Mercer, how nice to see you again.
What do you want? Ayla's voice was flat. I came to apologize. Ayla blinked. What? For what I said at the gathering. It was cruel and unfair, and I'm sorry. Beatrice's tone was smooth, practiced. I let my emotions get the better of me, and I said things I shouldn't have. Ayla didn't believe her for a second. Why now? Because I heard what you did for the Turner boy, and I realized I was wrong about you. Beatrice smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're clearly a woman of great skill and compassion, and I would like to make amends. I don't want your amends. Beatrice's smile faltered. Excuse me? You heard me. I don't want your apology, and I don't want your friendship. You humiliated me in front of the entire town, and now that people think I'm useful, you want to pretend it never happened. I'm not interested. Beatrice's face flushed. I'm trying to be gracious here. You're trying to save face, Ayla shot back. There's a difference. For a moment, Beatrice looked like she might explode, but then she took a breath and turned to Callahan. Rhett, are you going to let her speak to me like this? Callahan's expression didn't change. She can speak to you however she wants. Beatrice's mouth tightened. I see. Well, I suppose I should have expected this. You always did have a weakness for strays. Get out, Callahan said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm leaving. But mark my words, Rhett. This woman is going to ruin you, and when she does, don't come crying to me. Beatrice turned and swept out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Ayla stood there, shaking, and tried to catch her breath. You all right? Callahan asked. I don't know. Ayla looked at him. Did I just make things worse? No, you stood up for yourself. That's not making things worse. She's going to hate me now. She already hated you. Callahan's voice softened. But for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Ayla's chest tightened. For what? For not letting her walk all over you. For being exactly who you are. Ayla didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Callahan hesitated, then said, There's something else I need to tell you. What? I've been thinking about expanding the ranch, bringing in more livestock, maybe even starting a breeding program for horses. He paused. And I want you to run it. Ayla stared at him. That's a huge responsibility. I know, but I trust you. Why? Because you've earned it. Callahan met her eyes. You've earned everything, Ayla.
And I want you to know that. Ayla felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just say yes. Ayla took a breath. Then she smiled. Yes. Callahan smiled back. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. For the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek, Ayla felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Summer stretched into autumn, and the ranch transformed under Ayla's hands. The breeding program she'd designed brought in buyers from 3 territories over, and the livestock multiplied in a way that made even the most skeptical ranch hands admit she knew what she was doing. Callahan gave her free rein, and she used it. The corrals expanded, the barn got a new roof, and slowly the Callahan Ranch became known not just for its size, but for the quality of its animals. But success didn't make everything easy. There were still nights when Ayla lay awake wondering if she'd made the right choice staying. Still moments when she caught herself looking toward the horizon, calculating how far they could get before anyone noticed they were gone. The fear never fully left. It just learned to coexist with everything else. Callahan noticed. He always noticed. "You're thinking too much again?" he said one evening. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching Evan play with a wooden horse Callahan had carved for him. The boy had taken to following Callahan around the ranch like a shadow, and Callahan had stopped pretending he minded. "I'm always thinking," Ayla said. "About leaving?" She looked at him surprised. "How did you know?" "Because you get this look on your face, like you're measuring distances." Callahan leaned back in his chair. "You planning on going somewhere?" "No, not anymore." Ayla paused. "But the thought's still there, like a habit I can't break." "I understand that." "Do you?" "I spent 2 years thinking about leaving this place after my wife died. Thought about selling the ranch, moving somewhere nobody knew me, starting over." Callahan's voice was quiet. "Never did it, though." "Why not?" "Because running doesn't fix anything. It just moves the pain somewhere else." He looked at her. "You know that better than anyone." Ayla did know. She'd run from Ohio to Hollow Creek, thinking distance would solve everything. But grief and fear didn't care about geography. They followed you wherever you went. "I'm tired of being afraid," she said. "Then stop." "It's not that simple." "Not—" "Yes, it is." Callahan's voice was firm. "You've survived everything this place threw at you. You've earned the right to stop looking over your shoulder." Ayla wanted to believe him, but belief was harder than survival. The first frost came in late October, and with it came a letter. Ruth brought it to Ayla one morning while she was checking on a pregnant mare in the barn. "This came for you," Ruth said, holding out an envelope. "From back east." Ayla's hand stilled on the mare's flank. Nobody back east knew where she was. Nobody should be writing to her. She took the envelope and recognized the handwriting immediately. Her sister's. "You all right?" Ruth asked. "I don't know yet." Ayla waited until she was alone to open it. The letter was short, written in her sister's careful script. "Ayla, I heard from the wagon master that you made it to Hollow Creek. I'm writing to tell you that Father's house sold. There wasn't much after the debts were paid, but I managed to save a little. I'm sending it to you. It's not much, but it's yours. I hope you and Evan are well. Write to me if you can. Your sister, Caroline." Tucked inside the envelope was a banknote for $300. Ayla stared at it, her hands shaking. $300 was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. It was enough to buy land, to start over somewhere new, to build something that belonged to her and Evan alone. It was enough to leave. She folded the letter and the banknote and tucked them into her pocket. Then she went back to work, trying not to think about what it meant. But the money sat in her pocket like a weight, and by evening she couldn't ignore it anymore. She found Callahan in his study, going over ledgers by lamplight. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. He looked up. "Of course." Ayla closed the door behind her and sat down across from him. She pulled out the letter and the banknote and set them on the desk. Callahan read the letter, then looked at the banknote. His expression didn't change. "That's a lot of money," he said finally. "Yes, you could buy land with that. Start your own place." "I know." Callahan set the letter down and leaned back in his chair. "So why are you showing me this?" Ayla took a breath. "Because I don't know what to do with it, and because I wanted you to know that if I stay, it's not because I have to. It's because I'm choosing to." Callahan studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want, Ayla?" It was the first time anyone had asked her that. Not what she needed, not what was practical, but what she wanted. "I want to stop being afraid," she said. "I want Evan to have a real home, and I want to build something that matters." "You're already doing that."
Not in the way I mean. Ayla struggled to find the words. Everything I have here, it's because you gave it to me. The job, the room, the chance to prove myself, and I'm grateful for that. But I want something that's mine, that I built, that nobody can take away. Callahan nodded slowly. That's fair. But I also don't want to leave. The admission felt dangerous, like exposing a wound. This place feels like home. You and Ruth and even the ranch hands feel like family, and I don't know if I'll ever find that again somewhere else. Then stay. It's not that simple. Why not? Ayla looked at him frustrated. Because I don't know what I am to you. Am I an employee, a friend, something else? And I need to know, because I can't keep living in this uncertainty. Callahan was quiet for a long time. Then he stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the dark ranch beyond. "When my wife died, I thought I died with her," he said. "I went through the motions for 2 years, worked the ranch because I didn't know what else to do. But I wasn't living. I was just existing." He turned to face Ayla. "Then you showed up, this desperate widow with a starving kid and nowhere to go, and I wanted to turn you away, wanted to keep my life small and closed off. But I didn't." "Why?" "Because there was something in your eyes that reminded me I wasn't the only person who'd lost everything. And maybe if you could keep fighting, I could too." Callahan crossed back to the desk. "You're not just an employee, Ayla, and you're more than a friend. You're the reason this ranch feels like a home again, the reason I get up in the morning, and the reason I'm not afraid anymore." Ayla's breath caught. "Rhett, I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just telling you the truth." His voice was rough. "If you want to take that money and buy your own land, I'll help you. If you want to stay here and keep working, I'll pay you whatever you think is fair. But if you're asking what you are to me, the answer is everything." Ayla stood, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She crossed to him and stopped a foot away, close enough to see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of losing this. Of trusting it. And having it disappear. Of letting myself want something and watching it get taken away." "I can't promise that won't happen," Callahan said. "But I can promise I'll fight like hell to keep it from happening." Ayla looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't smooth or perfect. It was clumsy and hesitant and full of all the fear and hope she'd been carrying for months. But it was real. When she pulled back, Callahan was smiling. That same rare smile that transformed his whole face. "Does this mean you're staying?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." He pulled her close, and for the first time in years, Ayla felt safe. The next morning, Callahan made an announcement at breakfast. He called all the ranch hands into the kitchen, which was unusual enough that everyone paid attention. "Mrs. Mercer is no longer just the head of livestock," he said. "She's my partner, in the ranch and in everything else. That means you answer to her the same way you answer to me. No questions, no complaints. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and leave." Nobody left. Hank was the first to speak. "Congratulations, Mrs. Mercer." The others echoed him, some more enthusiastic than others, but nobody challenged it. After breakfast, Ruth pulled Ayla aside. "You know this is going to cause talk in town." "I know." "You ready for that?" Ayla thought about it. About Beatrice and the gossip and the judgment that would inevitably come. Then she thought about Callahan's hand in hers and Evan's laughter and the way the ranch felt like home. "Let them talk," she said. Ruth grinned. "That's my girl." The wedding took place in early November down by the creek where Ayla had first lived in that miserable shack. Callahan had wanted to do it in town, in front of everyone, but Ayla refused. She didn't need a spectacle. She needed something real. So they stood by the water with Ruth, Evan, and a handful of ranch hands as witnesses. The sheriff came out to perform the ceremony, and the whole thing took less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Callahan kissed her, and Evan cheered, and everyone clapped. It was simple and imperfect, and exactly what Ayla wanted. That night they had a celebration at the ranch. Ruth cooked enough food to feed an army, and people from town showed up with gifts and congratulations. Even some of the people who'd been cruel to Ayla in the beginning came, awkward and apologetic, trying to make amends. Ayla accepted their apologies without holding grudges. Not because she'd forgiven them, exactly, but because she'd learned that carrying anger only made you tired. And she was tired of being tired. Beatrice didn't come, but Ayla hadn't expected her to. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had left, Ayla found Evan sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. "You okay, baby?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About Papa." Ayla's chest tightened. They didn't talk about Evan's father much. It hurt too much. "What about him?" she asked gently. "Do you think he'd be mad? That you married Mr. Callahan?" Ayla pulled Evan close. "No, baby. I think he'd be happy. He'd want us to be safe and loved, and we are. I miss him." "I know, so do I." Ayla kissed the top of Evan's head. "But I think he'd be proud of us. For surviving. For building a new life. Do you think Mr. Callahan will be my new papa?" Ayla's throat closed. "If you want him to be." Evan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I do." Ayla held him tighter and let the tears fall. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up in drifts taller than Evan, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in the troughs froze solid every night. But the ranch was ready. They'd stored enough hay to last until spring, and the animals were healthy and strong. Ayla moved into the main house with Evan, and slowly the empty rooms started to feel lived in again. She hung curtains in the windows and put flowers on the table and filled the kitchen with the smell of baking bread. Callahan stopped eating alone in his study and started joining them for every meal. And Evan started calling him Rhett instead of Mr. Callahan, which made Callahan's eyes go soft every time. One night in late December, Ayla was sitting by the fire when Callahan came in from checking on the horses. He was covered in snow, his face red from the cold. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Fine, just cold." He stripped off his coat and gloves and sat down beside her. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. When I die, it'll pass to whoever I leave it to." He looked at her. "I want to leave it to Evan." Ayla stared at him. "Rhett, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I want to. He's a good kid, and he deserves a legacy, something that's his." Callahan paused. "And so do you." Ayla's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." "Yes." She laughed, wiping her face. "Yes." Callahan pulled her close, and they sat there by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. Spring came eventually, the way it always did. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and the ranch came back to life. Ayla spent her days working with the horses and her nights with her family. And slowly, the fear that had lived in her chest for so long started to fade. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be easy. There would be hard winters and failed crops and animals that died despite her best efforts. There would be people who still judged her and whispered behind her back. But she'd learned something important over the past year. Survival wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about building something strong enough to withstand it. One afternoon in early May, Ayla was in the barn when Evan came running in, breathless and excited. "Mama, come quick! The new foal is here!" Ayla dropped what she was doing and followed him to the birthing stall. The mare she'd been monitoring for weeks had finally delivered, and the foal was already on its feet, wobbly but determined. "Can I name him?" Evan asked. "What do you want to call him?" Evan thought for a moment. "Hope." Ayla smiled. "That's perfect." They stood there together, watching the foal take its first uncertain steps, and Ayla realized something. She'd spent so long running from her past that she'd forgotten how to look forward. But now, standing in this barn with her son beside her and a future stretched out ahead of them, she finally understood what it meant to be free. Not free from hardship, not free from fear, but free to choose, free to build, free to love. That evening, Ayla and Callahan sat on the porch while Evan played in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled like grass and rain. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ayla said, "about wanting something that's mine."
And? I think I already have it. She looked at him. This ranch, this family, this life. It's ours. We built it together, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have. Callahan took her hand. You deserve everything, Ayla. Don't ever forget that. I won't. She leaned against him. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself. You had it all along. You just needed someone to remind you. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade, and Ayla thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The husband she'd lost, the poverty that had driven her to Callahan's door, the cruelty of strangers and the kindness of unexpected friends, the fear and the hope and the stubborn refusal to give up. She'd arrived in Hollow Creek as a desperate widow with nothing to her name, and now she was a rancher, a healer, a wife, a mother, a woman who'd built a life from dust and determination. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still hard days and painful memories, but it was hers. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, survival wasn't about waiting for things to get better. It was about deciding that you were worth fighting for, that your dreams mattered, that you deserved a place in the world, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. Ayla had learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it, and she'd never forget. As the stars began to appear overhead, Callahan squeezed her hand. What are you thinking about? Ayla smiled. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And for the first time in her life, she meant it. The ranch continued to thrive. Word spread about Ayla's skill with animals, and people traveled from surrounding territories to seek her help or buy livestock. The breeding program became so successful that they had to hire more hands just to keep up. And Evan grew taller and stronger, learning the ranch work alongside Callahan, soaking up everything like a sponge. On Evan's 8th birthday, Callahan gave him his first horse. Not a pony, a real horse that Evan would have to grow into. The boy's face lit up in a way that made Ayla's heart ache. You mean it? Evan asked, his voice shaking with excitement. I mean it, Callahan said, but taking care of a horse is serious work. You're responsible for feeding him, grooming him, making sure he's healthy. Your mama will teach you. You listening? Yes, sir. Ayla watched them together. This man who'd lost everything, and this boy who'd almost lost everything. And she understood something profound. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who chose you when they didn't have to. That night, after Evan had gone to bed, Ayla and Callahan sat in the study. She was mending a shirt, and he was going over the books, but the silence between them was comfortable. Easy. Thank you for what you did today, Ayla said. The horse. It means everything to him. He's a good kid. He deserves it. Callahan looked up from the ledger. You ever think about having more? Kids, I mean. Ayla's hand stilled. I don't know, do you? I used to think I didn't want to risk losing someone again. He set down his pen. But now, yeah, I think I do. Ayla felt something warm bloom in her chest. Then maybe we will. Yeah? Yeah. Callahan crossed to her and pulled her into his lap. You've given me more than I thought I'd ever have again. You know that? You've given me more than I ever thought possible, Ayla said. A home, a purpose, a life worth living. We gave that to each other. And that was the truth of it. Neither of them had saved the other. They'd chosen each other, built something together. And that choice, made every single day, was what made it real. The seasons turned. Years passed, and the story of the desperate widow who'd walked through dust and darkness to beg for mercy became something else entirely. It became the story of a woman who'd refused to break, who'd worked until her hands bled, who'd proven that strength wasn't about never being afraid, it was about moving forward anyway. People in Hollow Creek still talked about Ayla Mercer, but the tone had changed. They spoke of her with respect, with admiration, with the kind of reverence reserved for people who'd survived the impossible and come out stronger on the other side. And Ayla let them talk, because she'd learned that other people's opinions only mattered if you let them. And she was done giving that kind of power away. On a bright afternoon in late summer, nearly 3 years after she'd first arrived in Hollow Creek, Ayla stood in the field behind the house and looked out at everything they'd built. The corrals full of horses, the barn with its new roof, The garden she'd planted that was bursting with vegetables. The life that was hers. Callahan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "That I was wrong," Ayla said. "About what?"
About thinking I had to do everything alone. About thinking asking for help made me weak. She turned in his arms. "You taught me that it's okay to need people, that letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself." "You taught me how to live again," Callahan said. "I think that makes us even." They stood there together, two people who'd been broken by grief and loss and fear, but who'd found a way to build something beautiful from the wreckage. And Ayla realized that this was what healing looked like, not the absence of scars, but the courage to keep going despite them. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it was also full of second chances for people brave enough to take them, and Ayla had taken hers. She'd walked through darkness and dust and despair. She'd faced cruelty and judgment and her own crushing doubt, but she'd also found love and purpose and a place to call home. She'd become the woman she was always meant to be, not despite the hardship, but because of it. And that was the real victory. Not surviving, but thriving. Not just living, but building a life that mattered. As the sun set over the Callahan Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayla held tight to the man she loved and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was enough, that she'd always been enough, and that the future, whatever it held, was something she was finally ready to face, because she wasn't running anymore. She was home.